Welcome to hashtag 52 Needs, and this week we are exploring what it means to have solitude and the importance of fulfilling this need. So I have the expert on this with me. Lucy Kippist is the editor of Flying Solo, a website and community for solo business owners in Australia, and the host of the Flying Solo podcast. Welcome, Lucy. I can't wait to hear what you have to say about solitude. But before we start talking about work, I'd really like to know is, do you get, and you're a mother, right?
Mm-hmm.
How many children do you have?
I have 2 boys, 7 and 4.
Okay. How do you get solitude?
Good question. I'm actually a single mum as well. So what that means is, I have every other weekend to myself. So unlike a lot of mothers out there, I do have that in the back of my head all the time, that those are the 3 days in my calendar that I can have that time to myself. On the other days of the week, it's much harder. And I find that the transition between the time that I do have on my own, coming back into the time where things are just going at 100 miles an hour, is often very difficult for that reason, because I'm missing the solitude. What I've come to do is to cultivate moments of that for myself in my day where I can. So I've always been an early morning person. And so I took to doing meditation as soon as I woke up, in order to create some space in my head and to kind of celebrate that time for myself by doing something that was just and only for me. Now that started as a little idea that now, 3 years later, I never miss, and I do it at night as well. And the benefits of that, everybody knows now, everyone celebrates meditation, but I think the benefits of that have also taught me to make the most of the moments of solitude where I can find them in the busy parts of my day with my kids. And it's also been about teaching them the power of it, to be completely honest, because for me now, I see it as a gift. And someone said to me yesterday, they were talking about how that moment where you're standing at the sink looking outside and having a drink of water can be one of the most powerfully self-affirming moments of your day. And I just loved that idea. I was like, I do that all the time. I have a glass next to the tap and I do that all the time. And I never thought about that as actually being a pure moment of solitude.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so the moments of solitude can be really, really short.
Yeah.
They don't have to be hours sitting on a mountaintop meditating. I mean, you can do, obviously, meditating is wonderful, but, it doesn't have to be something where you rigidly have to reinforce it and enforce it and go, I need hours of solitude. It's catching those moments that is really important.
It's absolutely true. And I think I think that's probably a mindset too, isn't it? So once you feel like that, you experience that somewhere, you're kind of looking for them, or you're noticing them more when you can get them. The other one for me is when I finally get the kids in the back of the car, because they're still, and no one can go anywhere except where they are.
Yes.
I'm in the car looking out, and I'm like, I love that moment. Because again, solitude, uninterrupted.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a difference between solitude and being alone and really relishing that moment, and loneliness. So can solitude slide into loneliness, or loneliness slide into solitude, or are they completely separate?
I think in the essence of the terms, they should be separate, but our experience of them as humans doesn't necessarily make it so. And I think the fact that we do consciously jam them together makes our relationship with solitude more difficult. Because solitude, to me, it isn't actually lonely. Loneliness is lonely, but solitude is like, there's a choice element there. Loneliness feels like loneliness, which is also a choice really when you think about it, but it doesn't feel like a choice, because loneliness is tied into those feelings of loss, or something that used to be there that's not, or you'd rather be somewhere else, like that experience of, this is not what I want to be doing. This is sort of like a negative experience, where solitude can be affirming, but being able to distinguish that is very difficult. unless you're being really conscious about it. And yeah, I think if you can be like, I can go a whole day without talking to anyone and really get a lot out of that. I'm also a big fan of yin yoga, which is that really slow moving yoga where you just moving through poses, and that quietness really restores something in me as well, because I have a lot of noise around me. But I do think, you know, if you dwell too long in that, you probably, I mean, I don't even know if you'd feel particularly lonely, because that seems to give you something else that you can cling on to. But I certainly think it's a personal journey, and something that, like anything, if you're less afraid of it, you're going to get more from it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I know that during the Corona crisis, a lot of people have been lonely. And that I think that's mostly people who are not used to solitude. And I'm making a very blanket judgment call here. But I think when you're used to being alone and you make it a choice, then not having a choice about being alone is actually much more bearable, because you can find the benefits in it. I know that for me, being alone is hugely recharging. I need to be alone at times, because if I'm constantly around other people, I get really drained.
Yeah.
And that's not because I don't have boundaries or anything. It's just that I don't recharge with people around me.
Yeah.
So solitude is absolutely crucial.
Yes.
Again, can I go from solitude into loneliness? I don't have any contact after a while. It's not that I get lonely, but I want to have people around me.
Yes. Yeah.
Somebody posted a post the other day and said, and there was a picture of this stunning house in the middle of nowhere next to a stream. And he said, you will have everything. You have a gym, you have a pool, you have a gourmet kitchen, food is there, you know, for the next, you know, you don't need anything. How long can you be there completely by yourself, but no internet, no TV, you have a library of books, you have notepad and pen, but everything else, everything electronic that connects you to the outside world has been removed. And I went, I could probably last about 3 months, but then I would need to get out.
Yep. I feel the same as that, to think about it that way. I think 3 months is probably it. We're back?
Okay, we're back. I have no idea, because mine still seems to be going, but then again, who knows? Okay. So I just said after 3 months, and then I need to get out. And you said, I feel exactly the same, or?
Yeah. So yeah, I would feel exactly the same way as that. To me, 3 months seems like enough of a time to sort of get an enriching experience without going over the other side. And I think
is that the typical 90 days again? You know, I mean, 90 days keep on popping up everywhere. I don't know, just a thought.
No, it is. What is that about our human experience?
I don't know.
Is, yeah, quite strange.
90 days of entering a new job, you know, the first 90 days as a leader, the first 90 days of this. So I don't know, the first 90 days of solitude.
Yeah. that could be a good book. A good book title. Yeah. I certainly love reading about other people's experiences of solitude, though. They're some of my favorite books that I've read, and certainly Cheryl Strayed's Wild was just so mind-blowing in that regard. I mean, I think she's like almost the poster girl for solitude, isn't she? Like the power of that. And so brave. I don't know if I'd take on that myself.
Yeah. Well, solitude does take some daring, I think, some courage, because it depends on, let me put it this way. If you're doing it in your bedroom and there are people outside, it probably doesn't take that much courage.
Yeah.
But if you're going into the wilderness and you're staying somewhere and you just get yourself lost where nobody could potentially find you, well, that's a different story. So there are degrees of solitude.
Yeah.
Being alone, walking the streets in a busy street, and you know, crossing the, you know, the Alaska by yourself. Yeah, different story.
So bad. And so, but you know, something that just popped in my head too is observing your mind in that period of solitude. Like that's really fascinating as well, like the places that it goes and how long it goes those places for, and what causes it to change when there's no real other external stimulation.
Yeah. And which direction it can go. Does it go up, uplifting, or does it go down into the more depressed kind of mode where the inner critic kicks in? Yeah. I think learning to manage that is a really good skill that you learn in solitude. Yeah.
So true. So true.
It depends, again, thinking about that, since we haven't scripted any of this, I mean, we're really going with the flow, depends on what you do in solitude. I mean, if you give yourself room to think about, and as we talked about before, if you give yourself room to manage emotions or process emotions, that's very different from reading an escapist book or watching a movie or something, which could also fit into solitude. Yeah. You know, it really depends on where you focus.
Yeah.
And how much room you give yourself. I mean, I always love the story of Newton sitting, it was Newton who sat under the tree and the apple fell on his head, right?
Yes. Yep.
Yes. I mean, if he hadn't done that, if he hadn't given himself room for solitude, maybe we would have never gotten to the laws, or he wouldn't have gotten to them. So, boredom, contemplation, navel gazing, they're also part of solitude.
So true. There's a lot to be said for navel gazing. And, one thing that I like that seems to be emerging now is a bit more of an acceptance of the fact that doing less can create more. Because we're also obsessed with this notion of productivity. I'm equally guilty.
Yeah.
Always reading about who manages to do what in what amount of time. But often it is the days where you go, you know what, I'm taking my foot off the brake here because I just can't think of anything new to say or think or be, and the power of that.
Yeah. And I think especially, given your work with solopreneurs, that's really important. When you work by yourself,
yes,
it's really important to be able to do that, because if you don't self-regulate, you're going to hit,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we actually have a whole well-being section on our website that is devoted to those sort of concepts and encouragement from experts in that kind of field to just sort of to remind you, because it is hard unless someone is telling you, to take a forced break, or a day off even. Very hard for a solopreneur, I think.
So solitude is something we know how to do, because as children, children can really play very self-contentedly for hours at a time when we let them. But we teach them and we teach ourselves not to give ourselves that space anymore, right? Because we have to do things. We have to justify having solitude and moments by ourselves. And we are in this overachiever place where, solitude is disconnection. It's being antisocial. It means I don't achieve anything. God, there's so many judgments around solitude.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about dropping all of those and going, what is it that I really need when I'm by myself?
Oh, good question. Yeah. It's a great question.
Well,
I was going to say, often for me, it's just honestly making a cup of tea to get into that headspace. Just turning the kettle on and just making a cup of tea and just going, okay, what do I need? Like it sort of interrupts the flow of my thoughts.
Yeah.
Signals to me, this is time for you.
Yeah. I go outside barefoot and walk on the grass for a few minutes.
Oh, yeah, that's good too. Yeah.
There are all sorts of ways. So anybody who's listening, if you have an idea of how you could, what your brand of solitude is, and what you like to do to really relish the solitude as well, or to create that moment of solitude, put it in the comment field so we can all share. So we can create that list of what do I do when I have a moment for myself? Because what do I do when I have a few hours, when I have a day? And again, it's not about filling it with activities, but it's about what will I get from it?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I love it. Such an interesting discussion.
Well, thank you so much, Lucy. I think we can continue this conversation for a very long time.
I agree.
And hopefully we will. But thank you for making yourself available. And thank you for your work with solopreneurs, because I know as a solopreneur myself, the support is really important. As much as I relish my solitude, I know that community is equally important. So thank you for that. And I look forward to seeing everybody else next week.
Thank you so much, Angela.